I spoke at the beginning of yesterday's show about what it meant to me personally, emotionally, to see Michigan win it all. What do you think Michigan's win communicates about college football writ large?
I think it was a good reminder about sometimes the best teams do win. And what you had, I think, on Monday night were the two most emotionally strong teams because they'd been through so much in terms of one team was a 2-win team during COVID. That was Michigan. Essentially hit rock bottom. Jim Harbaugh took a pay cut. I talked to a lot of players and coaches about what that year was like. Kwity Paye, who you remember, he was a captain on that team. And I talked to Kwity over the weekend because some of the players had referenced him. He's now with the Colts. But, he was telling me he would almost tear up watching this team because the tone that they were trying to set back then to kind of build this to where it is, I think he felt a very big attachment to that. On the other side, Washington, those guys, a lot of them had 3 different head coaches. They signed under Chris Peterson, had Jimmy Lake, and then obviously have Kalen DeBoer now. I mean, they were a 4-8 team. Nobody saw this coming. But I think the bond between both of them is a foundation of a lot of, especially offensive line guys. I mean, if you look at how that often is the backbone of any great team, the last 3 Joe Moore awards are
Michigan
and
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of guys who I talked to who talked about almost leaving, almost transferring out. I mean, I had a great conversation about an hour after the national title game with Trevor Keegan, who's one of the leaders of that Michigan team, an offensive lineman. And he was, very reflective on he almost left at one point. And his feelings on football really kind of changed. They did a 180 for a while and talked about how Sharon Moore helped him love the game again. And so I think all those things kind of come together and came to fruition for certainly Michigan this season and on Monday night especially.
How about the way Michigan put its team together? I mean, what does that say? Because there's not 5 stars everywhere.
No, and I think what we might have talked about this after the Rose Bowl, and I definitely talked to some of the players. Certainly Kenneth Grant, who's a budding superstar there, and he was a 3-star guy when he committed to Michigan from Indiana. And they talked about, Mike Barrett, who's a terrific linebacker and played a lot of football, also 3-star guy out of high school. I talked about we're the no-star defense, and I think it's actually, the more I've thought about what they said, I think it's true in this regard, where it's like a little like the old Dolphins perfect team of the no-name defense back in, to go way back. I think this team is so much better than the individual, as a group. One thing that they didn't get enough credit for over time, and I think that really showed itself on Monday night especially, they're a great tackling team. We don't talk about that enough. And I think Rich Rodriguez, who, a lot of Michigan fans won't love that name to come up in there, but like Rich Rodriguez is one of the guys who had talked about how the game of modern football had changed and it had become so much a space game. And the hardest thing to do is make an open field tackle. Look at Mikey Sainristil. Look at some of the guys who stop first downs from happening. Michigan is very good at that. And I think lost in all the other chatter of everything else was that they are, they're really physical and they're really fundamentally sound. And to me, that shined through again Monday night.
Well, Sainristil is a perfect personification of how great this defense is with, I guess, no stars. I mean, the kid's a converted wide receiver and puts on number 0. And, I mean, there's a possibility he's going to go in the first round of this draft. I mean, like, I know that might be an outside shot, but he's got a certain knack for the football, and he's a leader. And it's kind of fitting that he had that damn near pick 6 to kind of end the game, and Corum scoring twice in the fourth quarter, who comes back from a knee injury. And that's the phrase Michigan says, those who stay will be champions. And now he is. JJ McCarthy with only 1 loss since he's taken over control of the quarterback position. All of those things they kind of point out. And then that front 7 is just completely dominant, which is and I don't mind that you bring out Rich Rodriguez because I know you mentioned that but that just reminds me of the nonstop chatter that after Lloyd Carr, Michigan will never return to prominence, and not even Jim Harbaugh could change it because of what happened against Michigan State with that botched punt, and then Urban Meyer dominates. That's all I kept hearing. And so now that they're national champions, it's a mission accomplished banner that kind of shuts everybody up. So I don't mind it.
Yeah, look, I get it. I mean, I know you had Charles on here a week or so ago, and it's interesting because, like, Charles arguably the greatest of the greatest, kind of thing.
Him and Brady on either side of the ball. You can make an argument.
In terms of at Michigan,
sure,
obviously. And this team, I feel like because it was it was probably way more than 3 years in the making. Because of, I feel like the stuff you said, certainly with Ohio State, especially, and like you mentioned JJ before, JJ grew up wanting to be a Buckeye, and they chose somebody else. And so, like, last year, I think we talked about this at some point, but like, I remember last year I talked to him like about a week or two before they played Ohio State.
Yep.
And it was in Columbus, and JJ said something to me where as soon as he said it, I was like, ooh, this is going to be bulletin board material. And it ran in this Biff Poggi story I did about Jim Harbaugh's right-hand guy last year. And it was towards the end of the story, and JJ backed it up. It was arguably his greatest game, right? Because it was certainly no Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, who ran wild, but Donovan was playing banged up too. And JJ made some big throws and burned them and kind of carried them through. And just the fact that this guy who grew up wanting to be a Buckeye, and they chose somebody else, and now he is, he also epitomizes Michigan. One of my more memories of him was, a couple hours before the game this year in Ann Arbor, I'm walking through the tunnel, and I see Corum come up, and then JJ comes by, and, at that point, it's not like the NFL where you're talking to people right before the game, usually. Right. JJ, he just had this big smile on his face, he kind of nodded, and I was like, man, this guy looks like he's just the happiest guy in the world right now. And he's about to play one of the biggest games of his life, and his demeanor seems to really also epitomizes his team.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.